as well is you'll notice that it just said recording in progress. So do note that this is being recorded so we can share that with folks outside of those that might be joining us right now, but just out of respect for people, I always do like to let them know that this is being recorded. So plan and act accordingly. We're really happy to kind of kick off the Candidate Academy here for the Council Bluffs Area Chamber of Commerce here in 2021. This will be an ongoing thing going forward, but this is obviously our first swing, so to speak, at this. And we think it's so important because, you know, if you look at not only the policy apparatus that chambers are really, that's really important that chambers have and bring to bear for their members in their community, also that leadership apparatus is incredibly important and one of the most important programming pieces that we have to offer. So when you pair those two together and you try to identify some leaders in the community to educate them on what's needed to be an effective public official, I think that's really important. And I see some folks on here. I know that even if you're not running, you very well are going to be able to talk to folks that might be running down the line, or you be a mentor to some folks along those lines as well. So I think that's really important, that multiplier effect that we can then have as well. But just in the interest of time, I want to just go through a little bit of what the agenda is going to look like today. So today we're going to start off with Heidi, I apologize if I get your last name wrong, Burhans, thank you. Heidi Burhans, she's the state administrator of elections for Secretary Pate in the Secretary of State's office. So obviously very knowledgeable on what needs to go into the filing process, becoming a candidate, and all the I's and T's that you have to dot and cross to get that done. After her, we're going to be joined by Tyler Campbell. He's a principal with Fin Strategies, and he's going to talk about organizing a campaign team, how to do it successfully and grow it and really adapt your team to what you need to be successful in a given race. He ran Secretary Naig's campaign for Ag Secretary just this last time around. And then finally, we're going to close out with a panel discussion with some local elected officials. We'll have Melissa Head from the CB City Council, Chris Leferla from the CB School Board, and Justin Schultz from the Pot County Board of Supervisors. So we're looking forward to that conversation. And then I'll touch on some of the later sessions that we have coming up down the line, the other three later on. But I don't want to cut any more into Heidi's time. Heidi, we thank you very much for being with us today. And again, she's with the Secretary of State's office, and she's the administrator of elections, and she's going to share with us about the filing process and just those details you need to know how to formally become a candidate. So Heidi, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Drew, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this today. I think it's wonderful that you put in the effort to hold this academy because usually when the city school election year rolls around, people know it's coming, but sometimes there's just not an easy way to get the information out to everyone. And I think this will really make a difference there in Council Bluffs, especially because you are holding it earlier in the summer. So people have time to gain information and review the filing process and learn a little more maybe about the city government before they decide to file their nomination papers. So a quick overview of the city election. The city election is held in odd numbered years on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. So in Iowa, every single November, we have an election. Odd numbered years, city school elections, even numbered years, the general elections. And the city election is held to elect the city officials for the local government, and then also to vote on public measures for the cities. So such as bond measures and her bond issues. All cities hold a regular city election in that November, but it's held in conjunction with the regular school election. So now the election is known as the city school election. Before 2019, the school elections were held in September. And so now it's the city school election. So if you hear the county auditor or your city clerk or anyone in your area talking about the city school election, that is still the regular city election. But as part of the election process, some cities may hold a city primary to nominate candidates forward to the regular election. And city primary elections are held only in cities where the council has not chosen another nominating process. And Council Bluffs is a city that has primary provisions. And a primary is held when the number of candidates filing nomination papers is greater than twice the number for the open seat. So for example, the seat of mayor, there's only one seat for mayor. And so there can only be 2 candidates on the ballot for the regular city election. So if 3 people filed papers to run for mayor, there would be a primary election. Since Council Bluffs is a city with primary provisions, it's important that candidates or potential candidates know that the primary election would be held on the 5th of October this year. And then the regular city election will be held on the 2nd of November. So it's a short turnaround between the primary and the regular election. Let's see, I've got some notes here, just need to take a second. So, excuse me, the qualifications for a candidate for city election include that a candidate must be an eligible elector in the city and the city ward if there are any. And Drew, can you tell me, is Council Bluffs a city that has wards?
Has wards? No, we are at large. All
at large. Okay. So in Council Bluffs, a candidate must be an eligible elector in the city at the time of filing the nomination papers and at the time of the election. And an eligible elector meets all of the requirements to register to vote, but they don't have to be registered to vote. And an eligible elector must be a citizen of the United States and a resident of Iowa and at least 18 years old. And an eligible elector may not be a convicted felon unless the voting rights have been restored either by the president or the governor, including through executive order. They must not be currently judged incompetent to vote by a court, and they must not claim the right to vote in any other place. So a short list of candidate qualifications, but very important to ensure that you meet those qualifications before filing nomination papers. The filing period for the primary election is the 9th of August through the 26th of August. And on that last day of the filing period, the deadline is a firm one at 5 p.m. So county auditors, and if they've designated city clerks to be the filing clerk for the primary and city elections, they have to be very firm with that. If you walk in with those filing papers at 5:01, it's very likely they will be declined because they should be declined even a second after 5 p.m. And the filing clerks do date and timestamp those papers. So you want to be sure if you're cutting it close, you have to have those papers in by 5 p.m. Another point about the filing process is that by default, all of the county auditors are the filing clerks. However, Iowa code does allow a county auditor to designate a city clerk to be the filing clerk. Several years ago, the city clerks were the filing clerks for city elections. Then that changed. The law required that the county auditors would be the filing clerks. And then shortly after that, the law changed again, allowing the county auditors to designate the city clerks. But the city clerks are not by default a filing clerk. So you want to double check and be sure you're filing your papers in the appropriate place. If you don't have a chance to double check or you're a little bit nervous that maybe you shouldn't be filing with the city, it's okay to file with the county auditor, even if the city clerk has been designated the filing clerk. The county auditor is always going to accept the filing papers, but you do want to double check to see if Council Bluffs city clerk has been designated as the filing clerk before you file your papers. And in Iowa, there are no filing fees. So do not believe anybody that asks you for a payment when you're submitting your filing papers. And another thing about the filing period is that you cannot submit your nomination papers before the filing period starts. So even if you have all of your signatures collected in July and you don't want the papers lying around your house or carrying them in your car, you still can't turn them in before August 9th. So if you've completed the filing papers well in advance of August 9th, you'll just need to put them in a secure location, a location where you'll remember to find them when you are ready to file them. Part of the filing process is completing 2 forms. You will need to complete an affidavit of candidacy and a nomination petition. And so I thought I would take a minute to walk through the items that are on each of those forms, because it's very important that you complete those forms thoroughly. So in the affidavit of candidacy, you will put in your name and how you want it printed on the ballot. You can't include titles like Dr. or Mrs., but you'll put what you want to appear as your first name and your last name. You can include your middle name. And if you have a nickname that's how everybody knows you, as Rocky Smith instead of Richard Smith, how you want your name to appear is what you will put on the affidavit. So if you want to be, you know that the community is going to be more likely to recognize you as Rocky Smith, you can do that. But don't put quotation marks around it. It's just first and last and middle name if you want to include it. But make sure that you spell it exactly as you want it to appear on the ballot. And then you also have an option to include the phonetic spelling. So if you have a spelling for any part of your name that could be mispronounced or not easily recognized if it's pronounced incorrectly, take the time to write down the phonetic spelling, because voting equipment is used at the polling places. And part of that voting equipment is what's called the accessible voting machine. And that allows somebody to wear headphones and, particularly for the visually impaired, they can wear the headphones and they will be told the names on the ballot. And that's why we offer the opportunity to provide a phonetic spelling. And then also on the affidavit, you're going to note the office that you're seeking. And if you are seeking to fill a vacancy, you'll need to check the box where it asks if you are running for the vacant seat. If you're unsure that you're running for a vacancy, then double check with the city clerk. You can always double check with the county auditor, but I realize that it may be easier for you to contact the city clerk with some of these questions. The other thing you're going to mark on there is the type and date of the election. So if Council Bluffs is going to be having a primary election, then you would put in the primary date of the 5th of October, 2021. Then you're going to need to include your home address. And this information is public. Anyone, after you've filed your papers, anyone can request to view the nomination papers. So understand that the information is public, but it's still required. You can't not include your address or phone number just because you don't want the public contacting you. And then you are going to need to affirm that this is you completing this affidavit, and your signature needs to be notarized. So you can do that ahead of time, or you can do that there in the auditor's office. The auditors are allowed to notarize official election documents, or you can do that ahead of time. But if you show up to the filing clerk's office with your affidavit completed and you have already signed it, but it hasn't been notarized, you will need to complete a new form because that signature must be notarized. And the filing clerks, whether it's the county auditor and their staff or the city clerk's office, they are required to ensure that your signature is notarized. Any affidavits that are missing the following information must be rejected per Iowa code. So if it doesn't include the candidate's name or the office that the candidate is seeking, if it doesn't include the candidate's signature, and if the signature of the notary is not included, then the affidavits will be rejected. And the affidavits and the nomination petitions must be filed together. So if one is rejected, one of those two forms is rejected, the other is not also going to be, or the other is not going to be accepted, and they wait for you to complete the other form. Both forms have to be filed together. The nice thing about the affidavit is that if you arrive to the filing clerk's office and you have something missing on there, or it's not completed, you can still complete that right there and then file both the affidavit and the petition together. It doesn't work the same way with the petition, because the petition is being used to collect signatures of folks in your jurisdiction, and the header on the petition must be completed in full before you gather signatures. So if you show up at the filing clerk's office with not enough signatures, or the header is not complete, you can't just go ahead and complete that or finish adding some signatures right there to submit everything. So you want to make sure you understand the requirements around the nomination petition before you arrive at the filing clerk's office. So on the petition, there's a header at the top of the nomination petition page that's available on our website. You can also get it at the county auditor's office. And if the city clerk is the filing clerk, they also will have that paperwork available. Even if the city clerk is not the filing clerk, they should have blank petitions available there. You don't have to use that form. You can use blank paper you have at your house, but before you gather signatures, you will have to add the required header information at the top of the blank page. It's very, very important that you complete that header information. So we do believe that the easiest thing for any candidate to do is go to our website, download the nomination petition, and then complete the header, and then make copies of that page so that you can be sure that you're not missing any of the header information as you pass these petitions throughout Council Bluffs. So in the header, you will complete the candidate's name, the office you're seeking, the type and date of the election, and then the signers and candidates' affirmation of residence. And then you're also going to include your county and city of residence. And you will have to note in there if you're running for a vacancy or not. The reason this header information is important is because it's important for people who are signing petitions to understand exactly what they are signing. When they're signing a petition, it doesn't mean that they are promising to vote for the candidate. It doesn't mean that they are voting right then. It simply means that they support this person having the ability to put their name on the ballot and move through the election process. If you show up to the filing clerk's office with petitions that have signatures but do not have the header information completed, whether it's blank or it's missing some of the information, the signatures on that page will not be counted. So that's why it's also important to consider getting more signatures than required. And the minimum number of signatures required for a city election petition are either a minimum of 10 or 2% of the number of votes cast for that office in the previous election. So the city clerk and the county auditor will be able to tell you how many signatures minimum are required to get on the ballot there in Council Bluffs. However, no matter what that minimum is, I would strongly encourage you to get several more, whether that is 15 or 20 more, depending on what that minimum number is. In a city like Council Bluffs, a larger population, I'm sure there's a chance that some candidates may be going around to fundraisers. They may be going to different types of meetings and events where they're going to hand out blank pages of the petition form and just let them circulate through the crowd. They may hand some to friends to take to other events that they can't attend. It's always possible that somebody may sign one candidate's petition more than once. Their signature can only count once, and it's not illegal for somebody to sign a petition more than once, because when that happens, it's usually by accident. So no one's going to get taken to court because they signed it more than once, but their additional signatures will be crossed off. And we've seen that happen in larger events where, again, the blank petition forms start circulating the room and people may not be reading the header carefully to know exactly which candidate's petition they're signing. And so just know those extra signatures may get would get crossed off. So you want to make sure that you're collecting more than is needed. And I saw somebody put a note in the chat, 97 signatures are required. And I'm not sure who Jody is, if that's city clerk or somebody in the county auditor's election office.
She's the city clerk.
City clerk, okay. And maybe you guys already know if the city clerk is being designated as the filing clerk. Let's see. Okay, so then for the collection of signatures, I just want to let you know, since Council Bluffs is an at-large city, then of course you can collect signatures from residents anywhere in the city. And also the residents are supposed to include their address. However, if someone is homeless, they can either, for their address, include a description of where they sleep at night, or they can simply write homeless. And on the petition, people can use ditto marks under the date and the address. So using those little quotes, we see that sometimes when there are several eligible electors at one residence, then one person puts in their name, date, and address, and then the other residents at that address may just do the ditto marks under the dates and the residential address. Okay, so the next part is about who wins at the primary. So in the primary election, no winner is elected to city office. Candidates instead are nominated to move forward to the regular ballot. So the number of candidates who will move forward to the regular ballot are the highest vote getters, but up to twice the number of seats available. So if there were 5 candidates for mayor on the primary election, the top 2 highest vote getters will move forward to the regular election ballot. So if there are 3 open seats, then 6 candidates would move forward to the regular election ballot if there were maybe 12 candidates running in the primary for council seats. Those are, for example. When a candidate wins in the primary and moves forward to the regular election ballot, no additional paperwork is needed. You automatically move forward. You don't have to file any other paperwork. The only types of candidates who would have to file paperwork would be write-in winners. And we see those more often in the smaller towns where maybe there weren't many candidates that signed up to run. So the other thing that I wanted to review is resources. One of the first things I would encourage anyone considering running for city office this fall to do is go to our website and download the city candidate guide. And there are 2 different guides out there, so you'll want to make sure you're selecting the right one. you're going to select the candidate's guide to the regular city election for cities with primary election provisions. There's also one out there for the cities who have runoff provisions. So just take a minute to clearly read the two titles. Make sure you select the one for cities with primary election provisions. You can also access that from your city clerk's office, as well as from the county auditor's office. But for those of you who like to access things online, you can go to our website, sos.iowa.gov. And at the top of the homepage, there's a red banner. You're going to look over toward the right, and there's word elections. Click on that, and you'll go down to the candidates section. And then in the candidates section, you would select city, and that will take you to the page with all of the proper paperwork to run for city office. So there you will find the candidate's guide to the city election, as well as the affidavit of candidacy and the nomination petition forms. And in the back of the candidate's guide is a calendar for the primary and regular city election processes. And then also at the back of the guide is some information, FAQs about just the election process, and contact details for different resources. Something I would like to stress is that your number one trusted sources of information about elections, not just the city elections, but any election being held in the state of Iowa, are your county auditor and the Secretary of State's office. If ever you have a question about anything you're hearing from anyone about elections in Iowa, if there's anything you're unsure about, or you need more information, or you need to know who else to turn to complete a process, you can always contact your county auditor's office or the Secretary of State's office. We absolutely are your trusted sources for information. And that includes if you have questions about election equipment, or if things are connected to the internet. We've seen over the last few years some really unfortunate mis- and disinformation campaigns. So just know that you can always turn to us to gain the right information and the understanding of how elections are run in the state of Iowa. And then of course we can help answer questions about how elections are run across the United States. We're very fortunate that here in the US we have a decentralized election system, which means each state has their own set of election laws. Each state sets up their election equipment or sets up the certification process for election equipment that's used in their state. So because it's decentralized, no foreign actors or no malicious actors, even domestic ones, can hack the entire election system and thwart election results. So again, just knowing who your trusted sources are, you can always contact us with questions about any aspect of the election process in Iowa. At that point, I will take a breath and see if there are any questions. And thank you very much, Drew, for including those links to the city and school guides.
Yeah, thanks, Heidi. And one thing I kind of want to have you talk about too, not getting too much down into the weeds of politics and partisanship, but we hear a lot about voter fraud and things along those lines. Can you talk a little bit about, within your position of your experience with that, and just kind of give some insight as to how if there is much of that in Iowa?
So we are very, very fortunate that here in Iowa, we have a tremendous system of checks and balances set up for the voting process, for the candidate filing process, for the post-election process, moving through the days after the election, preparing for a canvass. We allow for recounts, like many of you may have heard what happened in our 2nd congressional district last fall. So we're fortunate that we have these checks and balances in place to help us detect attempts at fraud, or sometimes it allows us to find fraud, but unfortunately after the fact. Fraud is not rampant in our state or rampant across the country, but usually in a lot of states, there may be some instances of maybe attempts at double voting in elections. But what we've seen happen here in Iowa sometimes happens with absentee voting. And the cases I'm most familiar with are where parents with students away at college, they want their children to vote, but they don't double check with them to ensure that they are voting. And what they may not realize is that their college student chooses to register and vote in the city where they are attending college. And at the same time, maybe a parent submits a request for an absentee ballot for their child to be sent to their to the parent's address. And then sometimes we've seen the parent actually go ahead and vote the ballot and submit it. And that is caught after the election when it appears that that student voted twice because they did election day registration at the polling place in the city where they attend college. And then it shows that they submitted an absentee ballot from their parents' residential address. And then we do the double checking. Usually it's the county auditor working with the county attorney and maybe the local sheriff's department investigating it. And then it turns out, oh, the child and the parent never spoke, and the parent had no idea that their college student was voting on their own where they live. So there have been instances of that. There also have been instances of maybe a college student, whether they understand the process or not, maybe they're from another state and they're still registered there, but then they go and register where they're attending college, and they vote there where they're attending college, and then they submit an absentee ballot back at their home state. Sometimes there have been cases of adults not having anything to do with being a college student, but adults trying to vote twice. Again, it isn't happening everywhere. It doesn't happen a lot, but that is something that is reviewed in every election. Here in Iowa, we have election day registration. So even though we have a pre-registration deadline of 15 days before the election, after that deadline, anyone can register to vote in that upcoming election, but they have to cast a ballot at the same time. And so someone can move into the state of Iowa on election day and find out where the polling place for their new residence is going to be and drive straight there, register and vote. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just important that people understand that election day registration is an option here in Iowa.
Is there any questions from the group? You can either unmute yourself and ask or type it in the chat on anything that Heidi presented or anything that you're curious about. I did have another question. It's another panel that we have, in a couple weeks, but, technology, social media, all these different things, we're seeing a ton of different things, whether it's, the hacks that we're seeing all over the place, like you talked about, but also just how quick things can change on social media and if something can go viral, as they say. So can you talk a little bit about how that's impacted your job and, just overall within your office, but then also maybe the Secretary of State's office, how that's had to be taken into account?
Sure. So we say that cybersecurity is a race without a finish line. We are 100% always on a path to cyber maturity. And that just means that we are always working to improve our cybersecurity, not only for our agency, but for election officials across the state. And we're working very closely with local governments first and foremost with the counties, but we also are working to help provide resources and information to the local governments for the cities, some of the bigger townships maybe that use a little bit more technology. But being aware of social media and some of the problems or obstacles that can be encountered through there also falls under the umbrella of cybersecurity. Because as we've seen around the world, both bad actors and foreign nation states attempt to influence elections, we've seen them not only focus on hacking, but they work to influence people through social media. And unfortunately, there are a lot of folks who choose to use social media as their sole source of news and facts and information. And what can happen when somebody only uses social media is they can become so entrenched in maybe the information they're seeking or the like-minded audience that they may be gravitating toward. Those bad actors recognize how divisive this country has become in the realm of politics, and they have begun using that to their advantage, and they will build profiles that will mimic the types of audiences that people are gravitating to. And that's happening on both sides of the aisle. And it's also happening with people who on their social media may not appear extremely political, but these bad actors watch what people post and they figure out how to manipulate either current information and current videos out there, and they'll make a slight change that many people can't pick up on. They don't detect it. And when they see a video out there of a certain candidate, just of any candidate saying something negative about some other topic, they know that there's an audience that's going to use that as a rallying cry. And this really ramped up in 2018, 2019, and then was prevalent all across the country in 2020. So one thing that I strongly encourage everyone to do, whether they're a candidate, an elected official, a voter, or maybe not interested at all in understanding anything about the election process, but they're on social media, they need to understand that there are always bad actors trying to influence them in some form or fashion. So be careful of what you read online and be careful of what you post. And if you are an elected official or you become an elected official, be aware that there's always a possibility that somebody could try to mimic you or mimic your profile on social media. If they recognize that people in your community are looking to you as a trusted source or a trusted official, then they may try to mimic your profile to gain some credibility for in their agenda.
Thank you very much, Heidi. That's really, really good information. And it's a sad reality because, with the COVID situation we had over the last year, we as a chamber, as you can imagine, like to bring candidates forward to engage our members in the community. And, we had a couple folks, since we were doing it on Zoom, that just said no thank you, because they're like, we don't know what that even we trust you, we know you're asking the same questions to everyone, but we just don't want that out there. And it's a sad reality that we live in as a result of that. So I hate to cut you off because this has been a really good conversation, but we do have Tyler now with us to kind of join us and talk about organizing and growing your campaign team. So thank you very much, Heidi, for your time. I know you're busy, and I really do appreciate you taking the time to be with us and talk through some of these key issues as you think about becoming a candidate.
You're welcome, Drew. And real quick, I just see Barry's question in the chat. Yes, I would encourage you to put the primary election date in the header of the petition. However, if you put the regular city election date in there, that's okay as well. Either one is fine, but I would encourage you to go ahead and do the primary date, because that just helps inform the people who are signing the petition that there would be that primary election before the regular one. Thank you so much for having me, Drew.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Heidi. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And just to
Have a
kind
good one.
of keep the Zoom rolling, I want to welcome now Tyler Campbell. You see that he joined us. He's principal of Fin Strategies. He has a lot of experience in the campaign world. As I mentioned, he ran Secretary Naig's campaign for Ag Secretary. I believe it would have just been last year. And, obviously they were successful, being that he's still Secretary of Agriculture. So Tyler and I have had the pleasure of knowing him now for quite some time, probably close to 7-8 years now. So it's been a really good to see him grow in his profession, excuse me. And we're really happy that he's able to join us today to talk again about organizing a campaign team and really growing a successful campaign team to kind of take you to that next step to win an election. So Tyler, thanks for being with us. I'll turn it over to you.
Absolutely, Drew. Thank you so much. Everyone else, it's a pleasure to meet you virtually. And as Drew mentioned, I've had the pleasure of working with Drew and getting to know him over the years, pretty much since I was right out of college. And likewise, Drew, it's awesome to see you kind of taking the next progressions in your career. And I think this is really cool, and a great resource and tool that you're providing to folks over there. And just to kind of set the table here, Drew had asked that I go over just some of the basics and some advice in terms of successfully building out, organizing, and managing a campaign team. Again, this one will be geared probably a little bit more towards some of the local level, the city council, board of supervisor, state elected, as opposed to some of the larger ones. And so just kind of, bear that in mind. As Drew alluded, by way of background, I've had the pleasure of working in politics here in Iowa and nationally since about 2013, where my team, we're based over here in Des Moines, and all of us have had campaign experience going from the local, either managing, advising, volunteering at the local city level races, school board races, all the way to state rep, state senate, statewides, U.S. Senate, and then also presidential caucuses. So that's kind of the neat thing. We get to kind of run the gambit here in Iowa, and it's always a cool opportunity. And I would just underscore too, bipartisan. So we have team members on both sides, and I love to see my team members kind of on the Democratic side jump in and get involved in that. So that's kind of the quick background here. And so Drew, I did prepare just a short little deck that I might share my screen. And again, I'm not going to, there is some copy on it, but I'm not going to go through every single little word. And I would underscore too that who's ever, listening to this will have my contact information. Drew has it. And if there's any follow-up questions afterwards, I can give folks the deck that I put together. We're just happy to have a conversation with them, and kind of be a sounding board as well. So with that, I will jump into it here. And then also do not hesitate to jump in at any time with questions, either in the comment. Drew, if you want to have me pause somewhere and kind of reiterate something a little bit more, happy to do that as well. So let's do this. Now I'm still a little analog when it comes to Zoom, even though I don't know how many Zooms I've been on in the past year, but here we go. Okay, so is this working for everyone? Okay. So really, what I'm just going to walk through kind of quickly here are some of just kind of the different key roles. And again, for each race and each, size of race, these are going to be a little bit different, but I wanted just to touch on, the traditional key roles, who might be some good people for those roles, how do you find those people? And then, what are the underlying tasks that they really need to be focused on to make sure that, you're delivering a successful campaign, a cohesive campaign, and all of that. So we're going to kind of start at the top with the candidate. And really why it's important to think things through and get a lot of really good feedback as the potential candidate are looking to get into public service. We're going to touch on the campaign manager role, and then treasurer, which between those two, I would say are pretty universal on just about every campaign. As you start at these kind of smaller citywide, countywide, regional elections, you will probably have a more robust team, but a lot of times, some of the tasks that you see, I might talk about that the finance director has or the communications team has, frankly, will get rolled into the campaign manager's role. And so especially on these kind of smaller, more local elections, having a team that's, can wear multiple hats is really important, because at the end of the day, as many of you might know, but a lot of these early kind of smaller campaigns, it's all about bootstrapping, making your dollars go as far as they can. And so that's a really important thing. And then I'm going to touch a little bit on kind of volunteer organizing, grassroots organizing, just kind of at a high level, because I know with this, conversation, we're a little bit more focused on the team, kind of vendor considerations. And then probably the most important thing, in my opinion, but time management. So how to keep, as a candidate, how to stay on task, as the campaign manager, how do you make sure that you're doing everything efficiently and effectively to make sure that you're maximizing the time for your candidate, because at the end of the day, they need to be out doing the important things: voter engagement, voter contact, sharing their vision for their race and their seat. And so we're going to kind of walk through that. And then, at the end, we can pause again just for any questions or kind of back and forth. So now, whenever I'm speaking with a prospective candidate looking at jumping into whether it's a state Senate race, all the way up to congressional, it's very, very important. And the first conversation always starts at, why? What's driving you? What problems do you see? How do you think you will be effective at bringing new solutions forth? And how are you going to communicate that to the voters? And so it's just, that's a series of conversations, not just with the prospective campaign manager or consultant, but that's with, your inner circle, your friends, your family, and just, I can't overemphasize how important doing the due diligence on the front end, from the candidate side, just really thinking about, what's driving you for your consideration. And then of course, a little later on here, we'll get into some of just the timing and how to, when to make those important decisions. As a candidate, you kind of got to do it all, especially at these kind of more localized elections. Fundraising, and we'll walk through a little bit of that. But I understand, Drew, you have some great guests that are going to kind of really get into that in a little more depth later, throughout the summer as well. Canvassing, and by canvassing, what we mean is getting out, face-to-face voter contact, door knocking, getting out to community events. Being visible in the community, in the ward that you're running, in the county that you're running, is just so important, especially if, you're just trying to break into politics maybe for the first time. And, again, I'm kind of gearing this presentation a little bit more to folks who might not have, the biggest community-wide name ID ever. And so these are just the bare basics of really what, you need to focus on. And of course, candidates have to, be really thoughtful when they're communicating, on social media, with traditional media, with your local, NBC affiliate, with your local radio station. And so, it's, being a candidate is almost a full-time job in and of itself, even, for a city council race. But it's just, it's a lot of fun. I've seen, earlier on in my career, on some of the smaller races, I've had great experiences where they were even nervous about public speaking, but by the end of the campaign cycle, just getting out there, getting repetitions, not being afraid of taking no at the door or on a donor call. And by the end, just seeing their evolution and now how effective, public communicators and leaders they are. I think that's really cool. And so even if someone says, they're not the best in the public and all that, you can grow over the length of even just a 1 year, campaign cycle. And that's always kind of neat to see. And so I just, I think it's just so important, especially in a state like Iowa, that we keep encouraging more, talented more people to get involved in the public conversation. And so, whether it's, one of you kind of tune in with us now, or if, we're helping to recruit some good people around the Council Bluffs, greater Council Bluffs area, or anywhere in the state, just the first answers are probably going to be maybe no from a candidate or maybe no from yourself. But it can be done, and it seems like it's always very rewarding, win, lose, or draw anyway. So any kind of questions on the candidate side, or any comments there, Drew?
No, I just did want to add that you noted that we were having some conversations about fundraising and canvassing and things like that.
Yep.
Those will be really important, obviously, as that is actually the next piece, is that fundraising and voter outreach piece. And we'll have some folks that have done it statewide and more local too. So that'll be a good opportunity to hear more about that.
Absolutely. So the campaign manager role, sometimes it can be called a political director. It's really just, kind of based on preference. But really, this individual, and I've served in this role multiple times, it is, you are the organizer in chief, you are the task master, and your biggest role, I know we have some bulleted, specifics out here, but bottom line is everything you do, you are trying to provide your candidate with the bandwidth and the time to do what they need to do. So what we talked about before, hammering away on the fundraising calls, getting out to community events, getting to Rotaries, getting out, door knocking, voter engagement, listening to constituents, doing everything out in the community they need to do. And so especially early on, in some of these, more local races, when you're kind of looking for the person that could fit the bill, some might opt for, a consultant or professional that has, a couple cycles under their belt, and they really don't want to, leave it up to chance or anything like that. I personally have found, there are, ample number of, young, maybe fresh out of college, maybe still in college, individuals that are hungry, energetic. They might be actively involved in their college Democrats or their college Republicans. And, those are individuals that you can, frankly get for a fair price, that will put in the time that's needed, as long as they're organized. And so a lot of times, younger individuals really do like to get that campaign management experience. And I think there's just a wealth. And again, in Iowa, we're a political state. It's that's, I think, one of maybe the blessings in our curses. But I've always found an ample number of, young political science students, or just, students waiting to go to law school, that are ready to hop on for a cycle, roll up their sleeves, go to work, get out there, do the dirty work of the canvassing with you. But also it's kind of a good experience for them too, managing a professional who's looking at a race like this. And so again, the campaign manager role, if you can just hire one thing, it's this. And, again, just to reiterate, sometimes in these smaller races, your campaign manager might have to play, the fundraiser role, the comms role, the treasurer role, kind of doing all of those. And so, especially as you're kind of bootstrapping, being scrappy with your dollars, but really they are the day-to-day operations. You should be communicating with your campaign manager pretty much on a daily basis, especially as things are kind of picking up. They are the ones that need to, spend the time liaisoning with the vendor who's ever making your yard signs, your placards, your handouts and your door hangers, and helping take all that communication off the candidate's table. So, I probably spend more of my time as a campaign manager, or in the past, frankly, just, pulling call lists, organizing the outreach efforts for the candidate. So, early in the week, the candidate has a really handy, helpful call list that they know they can work throughout the week. They know what the ask is going to be. Is this going to be an in-person coffee? Where is this going to be at? Really maintaining their schedule and just being, consistent in that phase. And I think it's always good, bring someone on that you can work with, that you can trust. And that's, but at the same time, even if, you're a candidate and you might be toward the later end of your career, you might already have had a very professional, positive professional experiences and successes. If you have a younger campaign manager, I think it is also just important to kind of trust them, and let them, take all this off your plate, focus on what you need to do as well. And so again, it does depend on the race, but the campaign manager role, it can be very specific, or frankly, it can roll in the fundraising, the treasurer, the finance, all of that as well. And so again, just to kind of to recap here, personally, I think it's always great when younger individuals get a chance to kind of hop in this role, that they might have volunteered on a lot of races before. They might have been a field director on some local races, but just that's typically a good place to start looking, as you're getting going. Or, the other option is go with a more experienced, firm and team and that. But that's those are some of the high points there. Now, the campaign treasurer is, I would argue, just as important as the manager. Whether you wrap this into your campaign manager responsibilities, but when you're looking for a campaign treasurer, I think it's important to have somebody definitely detail oriented. Preferably someone that's handled some fundraising responsibilities or maybe some nonprofit initiatives in the past. I've always found some good for some candidates I've advised with, individuals in the community that might have led the, United Way Giving campaign or another nonprofit initiative. Someone that, they don't necessarily have to be an accountant. That is preferred, of course, if they are in finance or accounting. But I think you can just need someone that is willing to really do the due diligence on this stuff. It's important because you're going to have to file, timely reports, checking all of the legal requirements. And, this individual is the one that kind of holds the key to the bank, your campaign bank account too. And so they're probably taking weekly trips to the bank, depositing checks, getting you the statements, and, giving a readout to the rest of the team, just so, you really can kind of stay on track budget wise. And so, with it, a campaign treasurer role, I would look to probably more of kind of like a gray hair or somebody, frankly, who has done it before, just so, you're not, not risking anything on that side. But, they need to be, plugged in. They're just super integral to the race, whether it's city council all the way up to, the governor's race. So that's, just can't underscore enough how important this role is. So typically a finance chair or fundraiser, you can kind of interchange a little bit. So I see sometimes in more local races, if you don't quite have the dollars to pay a professional fundraiser or someone like, myself or some others that have done it, for a couple different cycles, then, a good place to look is, a well-trusted, connected person in the community, that has, a rich network that is willing to kind of be your, volunteer fundraising chair, where they'll help make some of those introductions to you. They'll kind of guide you on kind of giving levels, where, what's appropriate to ask, the leader of this bank, what's appropriate to ask this nonprofit executive director, on down the line. And so you can always go a couple different ways with this, but it's just, finding kind of a volunteer finance chair, I think, is a good option to save some dollars and resources, just because, frankly, sometimes fundraisers and good ones, they're kind of hard to come by, and they can be a little, spendy, especially for these smaller kind of budget races. And so kind of finding someone just, again, well-connected, well plugged into the community, and it just really kind of help keep you on track for your fundraising goals is just critically important, whether it's a mayoral race, on down the line. So on to the next. Okay, so, and this is it. Communications in a campaign is always very important, and I can just even say from experience, the last cycle or two, and I noticed there was some talk on social media even when I was first hopping on here. A smart communications advisor, I think, is key, even if it's in just an advisory voluntary role. So it's an individual who understands the dynamics of social media now, who understands, writing a campaign press release, who might have a couple good relationships with your local, news affiliates in your community. And so, again, this is another role in some of these smaller races where, you might have a contact or, a friend who's in, public relations or corporate communications in the community that might be able to just sit down with you once a week and kind of keep you on track, help you write out your messaging. And then if you do need a press release or an email out to, constituents, potential constituents edited, that's a great place to look for an individual like this. And I'll touch on this as we kind of get into the vendor, relationships a bit. Sometimes when you hire a vendor, they can take on this communications role as well. But I've just seen it work out well sometimes when you can really use, you know, a PR or a communications professional as a sounding board to make sure you're not just saying something out there wild, maybe double checking your social media calendar, making sure you're not, you know, getting something out there that you might regret, and just that the tact and the tone is cohesive of your messaging. And so, you know, there's a lot of great communications professionals across the state, in your local communities. And so if you can tap into that and get someone to help you, at least as things are getting up and going, that can really go a long way. It makes, you know, just makes your campaign look a little more serious. Just having that cohesive messaging, you know, kind of from start to finish, and keeping the candidate on track with their messaging. Okay, so this, in my opinion, is all, you know, one of the more important roles. And again, this is something that could, you know, the campaign manager might play that role based on their kind of, you know, grassroots organizing, you know, chops and experience. But it is always good to find, and whether this is your next door neighbor, whether it's, you know, someone who might be kind of closing into retirement, but has always been involved, interesting and engaged in politics, finding an energetic person that can really keep tabs on your, you know, little army of volunteers. And especially as we get kind of closer to go time and in the fall, it's so important. You know, the candidate should not really be wasting their time, you know, calling through and making sure they have enough people coming out to the Wednesday night phone bank. Is the pizza ordered? Okay. The candidate shouldn't be spending time pulling his walk book. You know, what, you know, communities and precincts do I need to be hitting right now? But if you can get a trusted friend, that really can put in the sweat equity in this spot to, you know, keep people engaged, drive out people to the 4th of July and Labor Day parades. This role and this individual is just seriously worth its weight in gold. And so, you know, there's a lot of different ways, again, to split this, but just making sure it's someone who, you know, is kind of committed to you, is important. And just, you know, it's always just a nice show of force too. If you show up to a parade, and, you know, you have a couple people, and, you know, your opponent on the other side is walking down with 35 people and t-shirts and throwing out the good candy and all that. You know, people in the community, and especially when these races are so tight, you know, that people are going to notice, in that. So, and then, you know, just to touch briefly on canvassing, it is always nice when you can get, you know, a small army of folks out there knocking doors, leaving literature, going door to door. But still to this day, just nothing replaces the candidate face to face at the door, at the coffee shop, you know, at the community forum. And, you know, I know it always can seem a little bit daunting, but, you know, we have candidates in, you know, some of these state Senate districts that are, you know, quite a few voters. They get to knock almost every, you know, independent or Democrat door in that district over the cycle. And it's some of them get through it twice. It is totally doable. You know, some people's work schedules are a little more challenging, but I would definitely underscore, while it might be tempting to, you know, throw out a ton of people out there door knocking with you, and say, okay, I checked out that precinct because my volunteer captain and this precinct captain knocked that out. That's all well and good, but that's a little less effective than you as the candidate showing up, listening to them, taking notes, sending a follow-up card afterwards. You know, just still nothing replaces that. And even for, you know, a community the size of, you know, Council Bluffs, it is doable if you have a good task manager, you're good with your time management, but the candidate ultimately should be the one out there, you know, door to door as much as possible. And then, you know, as you get closer, supplement it with more people if you want to hit a precinct twice, that kind of thing. But it is doable. You just got to get ready to get your walking shoes on. And, you know, it just, you know, the statistics over the years in political science around it still just bears it out that the face-to-face engagement still, you know, nothing has replaced that yet. You can do a lot of phone calls out. You can do social media. You can do the really annoying text that everyone that gets peppered with now. But that face-to-face engagement, it's worth, you know, so much more than some of those secondary touches.
Tyler, I just wanted to jump in.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to jump in really quick here because I have some personal experience on this. So prior to joining the chamber world, I helped with some city council candidate over in Omaha in 09 and 13. And he would always be with me every weekend at least. I would be out there during the week beating the pavement, but he'd be out there, and it always amazed people that like, oh wait, that's him right there. It's like,
Oh,
yes,
yeah.
that's him right there. He's out there. It made a huge impact. Also, don't let rain or snow stop you. When we were out there, I can't tell you how many people were like, you have our vote. You're out in the snowstorm.
Oh, yeah.
So like, yeah, so that kind of stuff goes a long ways. And to the fact of also just how big of an impact this makes. I can speak for an example back in 2017, the guy who's now the mayor and he's running again for mayor in Ames, he would call me quite a bit to pick my brain, just like I do to Tyler and other people on this kind of stuff. And he was saying how he was being told to stop doing door-to-door canvassing. I'm being told I just need to do phone calls. I just need to do social media blast and geofencing. And he goes, what do you think? I go, well, what I think is, do you want to win? And he goes, well, yeah. And I go, well, then don't stop knocking doors. So yeah, I just wanted to emphasize, and he did go on to win. So it's really, really important. And it does make a huge impact. And even though it seems old fashioned.
Yeah, it might seem old fashioned, but we've seen these last couple election cycles, the numbers bear it out, the candidates who kind of get out there, invest. It's really this, the candidate investing in themselves, frankly, just giving themselves a better chance to win. And again, it's just like, it is nice to see a bunch of volunteers out and doing it, but it's still just nothing supplements the actual candidate doing. And yeah, Drew, I've had the same experience, whether it's out knocking and, the early spring where it's snowstorming still, or, in the heat, 105-degree weather in August, and people, I think, actually respect that a little bit. And people at the doors, I couldn't even venture to guess how many doors around the state I've probably knocked, just like you have, Drew, but like, it's very seldom you get a very negative experience. Most of the time, overwhelmingly, people are receptive. They like, they might say, okay, thanks. They might take the literature, close their door, but it's very rare that, I've had someone let the dogs out on me, or like, slam the door in my face. And so as long as, you're respectful and you do it the right way, it's typically well received, in my experience. Okay, so this is kind of important too. And again, there's a lot of different ways to skin this one. But when, in the early days, you're grinding, you're raising money just so you have enough in the bank to where, can you do a couple mail pieces that you might need to do? Can you maybe get up on local radio toward the end here? Can you do your geofencing and your digital advertising that you need to? And that's always the focus of the early days, is just fundraising, voter engagement, fundraising, right? Eventually, though, it is nice to have some professional help and guidance, whether it's, getting your door hangers designed properly, getting a simple website stood up so, has, it does look professional, which, folks are just getting so much better and more efficient at that these days. And so I think like the pricing on a lot of this is definitely, I feel like you get a lot more bang for your buck. Now, there are vendors that, there's some fantastic ones in Iowa even, that you can roll a lot of these services into. Obviously, you always kind of get what you pay for, as the old adage goes. But in my experience, it's nice to have someone kind of walking you through and guiding you on what is the appropriate amount of yard signs. Do you really need to be spending this much money on a billboard? Probably not, right? Would we rather want that done, save every penny in the bank and maybe get up on kind of the local, local cable toward the end, focus a little more on social media advertising, just having someone to kind of guide you through that is important. And so you kind of have shops that are built more just for this, and they'll do the printing for you. They will, they'll do the graphic designing. They'll even help with some of your communication strategy, all that. Then there's some, more one-man shops where, in the past, when we've really been bootstrapping, sometimes I've performed all these responsibilities myself and just worked through other, third-party vendors, but finding a reputable, trusted vendor that's, not going to charge an arm and a leg, I think is important, just so, again, it's just your campaign has the cohesive look, the feel, it looks professional. It's what people expect, frankly. And, some vendors might try to sell you a bill of goods too big, but just at the end of the day, if you're serious about these races, you're going to need your palm cards. You're going to want, simple, clean yard signs as it gets time to start putting those out after Labor Day, of course. And it's important. And, I always advise, there's a couple that I particularly like, and I typically send people to, just because I know they have great, track records, and I've just worked well with them. But it's never a bad thing to talk to a couple, kind of hear what they're thinking, new ideas in that. But just, as you're kind of, building out this budget and being really thoughtful, just make sure you have enough in the tank to pay, someone reputable to help you, amplify this voter engagement.
One thing too, Tyler, I wanted to just add really quick, and it just really depends on what side of the aisle you're on and who your demographics and constituents are that you're trying to go. Keep in mind, even as something as minute as are they union, that can matter to a candidate. Like if you need to look, that can be even something you need to consider.
Drew, that's an excellent point. There's, you hear horror stories where, if, not to get, too political here, but, historically, some of the unions have been a lot more supportive of, one political party, and they'll support, based on the candidate, and, varies by union, of course. But if that, candidate, I've seen them print T-shirts and print mailers and flyers and send them out. And if you forget to put the union bug, from the local union print shop, that can really rub individuals, in organized, tradesmen and union folks. It can really rub them in the wrong way. And so that's a great piece of insight too. It's just like, yeah, most shops typically only handle one party or the other, right? And again, just, some of the races we're talking about here are, they're nonpartisan. Typically, a lot of people kind of do understand where the right, candidate might align themselves. But, if they choose a certain vendor or the other, that might, tip the hand on, which way they're kind of leaning there. But yeah, it's important finding the right vendor that you can trust. And, even from mayoral race up, you're probably going to need someone filling this role. And, that's, again, to kind of circle back to the campaign manager role, they should be the ones really liaising and taking the time and working with these vendors and keeping that open line of communication. It's not something the candidate really needs to be jumping into so much. They need, final sign off on, the design, the final copy, all of that 100%, but just the day-to-day back and forth with, the vendor here, you should have your campaign manager, taking that on as one of their core responsibilities. Okay, so just to kind of wrap up here a little bit, when it comes to planning and getting things off the ground, and I'm more than happy to email over a couple examples to folks too, or anyone who kind of reaches out. But I really like to, I like to call it a work back calendar. So, you're thinking about, and it's really like a month by month progression of what are the absolute necessary things you have to get done in March as you're getting ready to file. When you're going to have enough of your petition signatures done, what's the plan for that? And this document, it's a very detailed document, but it's a great exercise just to get your manager and your candidate on the same wavelength, so they understand the expectations. And in my experience, it makes it a little less overwhelming too, when you just take small bites out. What do they say? You eat an elephant one bite at a time. It's the same thing. So, okay, you have your April calendar laid out, and these are the core things I need to get done. I don't need to worry about everything often in the summer and getting a parade and all my house parties set up yet. But just having a really thoughtful work back calendar, I just think really helps. And I think it takes a little bit of the stress out and the uneasiness. And so I'm always a big proponent of those. Another smart exercise, and this kind of can get wrapped into your budgeting exercise and working back. Okay, historically, and it's not hard to go and look at, either through Secretary of State resources or other just online resources, how much has been spent, in the last 2 cycles Board of Supervisor race. Okay, that gives you a general ballpark of where you need to be shooting for fundraising wise. Just a really, really smart thing to do right from the get-go, just to make sure you're hitting those, fundraising benchmarks. Make sure, you bring on your vendor when you need to. When are your placards and your yard signs going to be ordered, so you have them at, parades and the right things. And so there's a lot of great examples of how to do this. I've kind of landed in on a process I like to do, but it's a very smart, smart thing to do early on. And then, it's part of that, doing your, like I almost call it like an election audit. So I'm like a big nerd with when I like to go back in and look at the different precinct, outcomes of the past couple cycles, the congressional outcomes, the trend of the voter registration data, on and on and on. That's all that's all a smart thing to do early on. And I feel like it just gives you something to shoot for. Okay. In a normal year, toss COVID aside, what is expected turnout going to be? And it just really helps you start zeroing in on, okay, if I need to turn X, amount of people out, what does kind of my general voter contacts need to be for May and June, and how many folks, do you need to get in front of? Last thing I think I'll just hit on quick. And people have a lot of different opinions on this, but sometimes you hear about, a campaign or a group establishing, a kitchen cabinet of, close, trusted advisors. I always think that's so smart to do. I think sometimes you need to be careful about not having like a 12-person inner circle kitchen cabinet to where you have to have a weekly call with, too many people, because too many cooks in a kitchen. It can be a little distracting, and you're going to get a lot of great ideas. Maybe that's a good thing to do for the first month or so, but really narrowing down into that trusted core group of advisors to where the candidate has, a little out there idea. Maybe this is the group that kind of keeps them grounded, but also it's comforting from the candidate standpoint, in my opinion, to know that there's people willing to volunteer, invest in, some smart, pragmatic insight, and just keep them energized, And so, building out, your core 5 to 6 kitchen cabinet that you're going to lean on for stuff. Maybe you're on a regular email chain throughout the whole thing with them, is important. Having a former, elected official who's won always is, I would have one of them on there for sure, who's been through the trenches. And then, and I'm sure this will be covered a little bit more in some of the other, subsequent meetings here, but, there's great resources on Secretary of State. And it's important as you're working on that work back calendar to know all of your filing days. Like you want to make sure you have way more than enough petitions by, this date, when you need to file. And it's just, you have a big calendar up in front of you and you're working back from that. So you just do not want to miss any of those deadlines. So I guess very last thing here, and I think this has kind of been, I suppose, my overarching, theme, and I've probably hit on it 5 times now, but it's so important to have smart, time management from a candidate's perspective, but also that right campaign manager who can help that, candidate get there. Because at the end of the day, so much of huge chunks of the candidate's time is going to be fundraising meetings, fundraising calls, and then getting out, door knocking after work, door knocking on the weekends, getting out to the coffees, with folks, community events. And so just, being really smart with your time management. And I think it also, again, just it helps make it a little less overwhelming from a candidate's perspective when you have someone really helping, keeping you on track and keeping you on your core responsibilities, instead of wanting to jump in and, have a finger on every single little thing. So that's important to me. And I think, it's, over time, you learn that it's just critical to keep, you as the candidate, to focus on what you need to do. What are the most important things? So Drew, any kind of final comments here? Anything you want to kind of zero in on just a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. You kind of talked a little bit about it, and it kind of depends obviously on the scale and the size of the campaign, but sometimes you hear the concept of campaign co-chairs. Can you talk a little bit about kind of your experience with that? You mentioned like bringing in some people who may have experience in running, who have been in elected office or whatever, they've been chiefs of staff or whatever, have some experience in that regard. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. And this kind of gets back to the kitchen cabinet theme too. And like I said, there's kind of different ways to organize this. But it is nice, especially if you're a first-time candidate or you're just still somewhat of a political novice, if you can find that individual in your network or your community. And I think anyone in Iowa is going to know a couple of these folks that you can bring on as, it's not necessarily your campaign manager. It's not really a paid role or anything like that, but having a campaign, co-chair / finance chair, it's important, because I feel like when maybe a bad article comes out, or maybe you see some like internal polling and you're like, holy cow, and this is like the sky's falling for the candidate. Having that, having that gray hair, having that experience you can lean on just to keep, kind of keep you grounded and focused is really important. This person, you're going to have, constant contact with them, or, pretty regular contact. But, having that co-chair, having that finance chair, I think it's important, and just finding that right person who you can trust to give you, maybe some advice sometimes you don't want to hear. Right. So that's important to do. And as you're kind of building out your internal kind of, close team.
Did the group have any other questions for Tyler? Feel free to put them in the chat, or to just unmute yourself, ask if you have other questions regarding the stuff you presented on, or maybe some other things that you think he may have some knowledge on. One thing I was curious about too, Tyler, obviously you've done a statewide campaign, I mentioned. In your experience working in the Council Bluffs area, and that's really, obviously tailoring it down and targeting a smaller area of the segment of the state. Anything in particular that you can think of or recall that helped you be successful in that part of the state, or this part, I should say, of the state?
Yeah, and so no, that's a great question. And when and that kind of almost gets to the kind of the constituency component. So running a campaign up here in Beaverdale or Urbandale is certainly going to have a different look than Council Bluffs. You're still going to have kind of that more urban suburban component to it, but you also, for example, are going to need to appeal to the ag community and some rural constituencies a little bit more. And so I just think folks in that area, in my experience, they like to see people showing up, right? I think, and it's weird how sometimes that's even different in different parts of the pockets of the state. But in my experience, when you actually, as a candidate, get down there and you show up, people show up. Like, we've always had big turnouts at our coffees down there, or some of our fundraisers in that area. And I think it's, maybe that's our big Iowa, caucus, mantra. But like, if people expect you to show up, well, maybe fist bump them now. I'm not sure if we're back to shaking hands yet, but just being there, being visible, just frankly, just being a real person to them is important. And sometimes a flashy ad, I don't know if that sometimes might not work as well in a place down there, as opposed to just the candidate being there in person, establishing linking themselves to their constituents and their neighbors, and letting them know that they're here for the community. So that seems just to always be important. And I feel like I've received some blowback sometimes when a candidate hasn't showed up in person, especially down in that area. So, which is a good thing. I think voters I think they're educated down there. I think there's a big hunger to be involved, and so I think it's all good things.
Well, and along those lines, I mean, you don't have to look any further than the fact that you just looked 20 years ago or whatever it was, and we had the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader from the same community here in Council Bluffs, and now Mike's not in, the Groundstall's not in obviously anymore, but Brent is back in. So yeah, there's definitely some engagement and activity down here. But that's one thing I have noticed, and that's one thing we've been happy to do, is provide those opportunities to meet those candidates and elected officials.
Absolutely.
Does anyone else have questions for Tyler?
Not all at once. No, I don't. It's certainly a broad topic here, and it's like, this is definitely just scratching the surface. But I hope that this is helpful a little bit, just to see how just how from my experience, how I like to kind of view things and organize things a little bit. But again, goes without saying, if anybody has any questions, wants to have a one-off, use me as a sounding board, I'm more than happy to have a conversation. I make it down to the area regularly with different client stops and events. And so, look me up, or if you're ever up here in Des Moines, our office is always open. We're just in the East Village, kind of down near the Capitol. And so I have a good meeting spot down there as well. So, other than that, Drew, any final parting thoughts? Or
I don't think so. Just thank you very much. And one thing I will say, we just had ABI in town, their policy team, to do kind of a recap of the session, look ahead, stuff like that. And they talked about how they're going back, doing their big event on Wednesday, the first week of the legislative session. And I focus on that one because that's the place that you and I always seem to run into each other, Tyler.
Yeah.
So if you ever do want to, that's a good opportunity. If you want to come along to that in January, the first Wednesday of the legislative session, that's a good opportunity to see people like Tyler and others that are good people to talk to. So Tyler, we really do thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you again in person now that we're kind of moving beyond COVID a little bit on some level. So
yeah, nope, looking forward to it. Drew, always good catching up with you. Just everyone I know, really appreciate your time here on a Friday. And again, just we'll be happy to stay in touch as we move forward here.
Well, thanks a lot, Tyler. I really appreciate it.
Awesome.
All the other folks that are on, we actually have a break now till 11:15 for the candidate, or not, excuse me, the elected official panel. So obviously stay on the Zoom, things like that. But feel free to take a break now for the next 18 minutes. Just get back here about 11:15. We're going to have Melissa Head, Councilwoman from City Council, Justin Schultz, Pot County Supervisor, and Chris Leferla from CB School Board here to talk to us at 11:15 to 12 o'clock, and then we'll conclude things. So go ahead, take a break. We'll see you guys in a little bit. Hey, Melissa, we're on a break now for the next 12 minutes. Folks are jumping back on right around 11:15, and we'll get started with you guys. Hey, Justin, we're on a break until 11:15, and then we'll hop on with the three of you. So then we'll be good.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Chris, just to let you know, we're just waiting we're on a break until 11:15, so we'll get started then.
Okay, thanks, Drew.
So I do think we'll start kind of getting things back rolling here, just so we can kind of get everyone logged back in and make sure that Chris and Justin and Melissa are able to get connected and do whatever they need to do. So we'll start kind of getting the ball rolling here again. And as a reminder, we'll end at noon. And then before we do that, I'll kind of go through what kind of the remainder of the candidate academies look like the next 3 sessions over the next couple of weeks going into August 6th on the last one. And I'll do that at the very end. But right now, we're actually going to have our third and final segment of today's Candidate Academy. And it's really just looking at with elected officials who have been successful here in the Council Bluffs area and running for and being on for whether it's in multiple terms or single terms, their respective elective office. So who we're fortunate to have here with us today is we have Melissa Head. She's one of the longest tenured councilwomen on the Council Bluffs City Council. So we're very happy that she's here with us today. And then we have Chris Leferla, who's actually the president, chair, whatever he prefers to go by, of the Council Bluffs School Board. And then congratulations, Chris, on that great news you guys got from the governor's office too on Wednesday. That's really, really, really important. I don't think I can understate how important that is. When other school districts are getting slapped on the wrist throughout the state, you guys are getting $7 million from the governor. So kudos to you guys. And then the last person that we have is Justin Schultz. He's been on the county board for a number of years. He was the chair last year, and he's really a great resource from the county's perspective as a county board of supervisor. So what we'll really do just to kind of get things started is I kind of did give you guys each a little bit of an introduction, but I did want to afford each of you the opportunity as well to just introduce yourself a little bit and share any information in addition to that if you wanted to. So I'll start with Melissa, if you're there. I will start with you and have you give a little bit of an introduction of yourself before we kind of jump into some of the points that I wanted to make sure we talked about. We can come back to Melissa. So what I'll do is I'll go to Chris and then Justin, and you guys can provide a little bit of a, oh, sorry, go ahead.
That's okay, I'm on. I was like, oh, you're too close.
Oh yeah,
I don't
sorry.
have a whole lot to share. I mean, this is, yeah, that's okay. About 11 and a half years on council. This will be my last year. It's been a great opportunity and just happy to help anybody that's thinking about running today with questions. So.
Well, thank you, Melissa. I appreciate that. And we've appreciated your service. And I do also up front want to let you all know, you might have noticed it's being recorded. We are recording this to be able to share that out with folks. I just like to let you know that beforehand out of respect. So Chris, we'll go to you.
Good morning. My name is Chris Leferla. This is my second term on the school board. And there are people on this call that have more experience running a campaign than I do, but I hope that I can contribute a little bit to all of this. And Drew, I just want to thank you for coordinating the Candidate Academy. I think it's an important resource for people that are planning to run for elected office, and I'm glad that you're taking the lead.
Thanks, Chris. We're happy to do so. And thank you for all the help that you and guidance you've provided as we've gone through this process as well. And Justin, we'll go to you now.
Hey, hello, everybody. Yep, I'm Justin Schultz. I've been on the county board now. This is in my second term as well. Yeah, like you mentioned earlier, I finished up being chairman, and unfortunately, it seems like every year that I'm chairman, there's some sort of like crazy thing that happens in this area. So I'm going to avoid chairmanship for a little while. But yeah, it's been a great run so far, and I intend to, hopefully continue on, do one more term, and see what the future has after that. But yeah, I'm really excited to be here today, and looking forward to sharing whatever bits of advice I can with anyone about campaigning. Worked really hard at it, so I got a lot of good notes that I'm willing to share. So
thanks a lot, Justin. And Melissa, we'll start with you again with kind of the first question or just topic to kind of speak about. And I really wanted to just kind of start about, we've heard from some folks, on how to organize a campaign team, build a campaign team, from the Secretary of State's office on basics as to how to file to be a candidate. But really, I just wanted to give you a chance to talk a little bit about, are there some lessons that you've learned as far as filing in a candidate, as a candidate, growing your campaign team and doing so successfully here in Council Bluffs that you would like to share with the group?
Sure, and obviously, like Chris said, I mean, there's probably people that have way more experience. When I first decided to run, I had no clue what I was signing up for or doing, but luckily I had some really great people that helped. I think the biggest thing is your campaign team. You're going to be so overwhelmed with trying to be at events and getting out to the public and making your appearances and raising money that it's so important to have, especially when it comes to funding. If you have a great treasurer that can keep track of all of that for you, and then just people that are there to support you throughout. If there's something that's not your strong suit, maybe social media is not your strong suit, or putting together, leaflets, and that's not, and just making sure that you really reach out, because people are more than happy to help. And don't try to overwhelm yourself and do things that aren't in your comfort level. Find someone that's good at that and then have them on your team. So just, whatever is your favorite things, really focusing on that, and then having a team that can do the rest for you, because it does get to be a lot, especially the first time. That would be my advice, is just making sure you have people that cover things that you just aren't that comfortable doing yourself.
Thanks, Melissa. And Chris, we'll go to you. Same question, just on lessons learned that you found as filing a candidate and growing your campaign team over the years.
Sure. Well, I don't know how many people that are in this candidate academy today are running for the first time, but I would say one of the things that I learned when I ran for the first time is the idea of running for office is more intimidating than the actual running for office. When I ran for school board the first time, school elections and general elections were separated, and not many people voted in the school elections. So I have experience running in both the school election and the general election, now that school elections have been moved and combined with the general election. And I would say I underestimated the impact that moving school elections to the general election would have in terms of the work you would need to put in to your campaign. So, I don't have, I would say getting the word out early to those people that are closest to you, letting them know that you're planning to run, and trying to build a small team of people that you trust. And, that is probably the most important thing that I did when I ran. But, I admittedly ran, pretty minimal campaigns. So if there are people that are on this call that are looking to, put in, little minimum effort for maximum output, I might be able to help with those things, but there are probably other people like Justin and Melissa and Steve, who've experienced running, more professional type campaigns. But I do have some of that experience in running those smaller, more, close knit kind of campaign. Is kind of what I focused on, just keeping a small group of people really close to me.
Thanks, Chris. And Justin, Chris did a really good lead in for you, because, you have a different perspective because you're running countywide. Platte County is huge. So obviously, you have a little bit different perspective on that. So I'm curious to hear about some of your lessons as far as filing and building your campaign team.
Yeah, the first bit of advice that I'll offer anyone that's going to run, especially if you're married or in a serious relationship with your, girlfriend or whatever, make sure that your partner is on board with you. I can tell you several, I learned this the hard way, so let me be an example, but you need to make sure that your spouse is on board with you and willing to help, and making sure that campaign team that you build, that individual is on your team, and make sure that they are in the know of what's going on as well, because there's nothing worse than thinking that you're going to go out on Friday night on a date with your spouse, and then you come home and say, oh, well, I got to go to this campaign event, so I'll say first and foremost, make sure that then, your campaign team, just like, both Chris and Melissa mentioned, I mean, they're very important. You cannot do it all by yourself. I've tried that. I've tried it twice. It just doesn't work. Especially in Potawatomi County, us being the second largest county by land, we've got 13 municipalities that ultimately you got to hit in some form if you want to gain votes in these communities. And so you need a team of people to help you do it. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to have, when I first ran, Melissa was very helpful. She kind of showed me the ropes a little bit. And then the second time around, I found myself a guy by the name of Cole Button. And I would urge you all to find yourself a guy like him that's, 100% dedicated to you and willing to just kind of take do things that you need them to do. So that way you can go to the event, shake hands, introduce yourself to people. And then in the background, you got people that are putting, stamps on envelopes, or, trying to help you process the data from voting data that's coming in. I mean, you need a big team. So, and then the other one, this is kind of a silly one, but it's serious. Remember your password when you file this stuff with the state, because you do it at the very beginning, you get on there, you log it all up. and then you may not touch it for a month or so at a time, and it's super easy to forget. And then it's a pain in the butt to go back and try to get that password back and get into the state's website. So, and we're talking about the ethics committee webpage. I'm sure you've talked about that already, and if not, I'm sure you will. But you know, it's important to make sure you know what you're doing there. But you know, we could go this. I could talk about this for days, but you know, biggest thing is your campaign team, and again, making sure your spouse is there.
Yeah, that's really good advice, Justin. Before we go into the next topic, as I mentioned before, when we were talking to Tyler Campbell about kind of growing your campaign team, you know, in my past experiences and talking to people who have, you know, retired from office, that's the number one thing they say all the time is, you know, they have to thank their family. As you well know, the sacrifice that they all make so for any elected official to be successful. So thanks for especially noting that. The next piece that I wanted to kind of touch on, and Chris, we'll start with you this time, is kind of realistic expectations for local campaigning as far as canvassing and outreach and voter engagements and vendors and all these different things that we had for those of you who were on before with Tyler Campbell talked as you kind of grow your campaign team. But can you talk a little bit about your experiences with that as you run your campaigns? I know you said you kind of had a minimalist approach, but I'm curious on your insight on that.
Yeah, I did. And I think, you know, when I ran for school board the first time, I really focused on who votes in school elections because, again, you know, school elections were separate back then, and you know the turnout was very low, sadly. And so I really focused on you know who's voting in school elections and really trying to connect with them. So it's parents, it's staff, and it's elderly people and others that are you know really concerned about property taxes, but you know, trying to find ways to connect with those specific groups of people. You know, I didn't want to dedicate, you know, tens of hours a week into the campaign. I couldn't do it, not with my family commitments and things like that. Another thing I'll say, and this may sound obvious, but participate in all of the candidate forums, all of the meet and greets that are coordinated by organizations and groups across the community. I've just seen, you know, people who fail to attend some of those events, and I think it really hurts their campaign to, you know, for instance, go attend a forum and you see that, you know, 3 of the 5 candidates for school board are there. That speaks about the people, you know, people leave with a perception about the people that didn't attend those events. So it's hard, but, you know, try to make sure that you're participating in all of those things. And then when it comes to school elections, you can't campaign at school events, but you can certainly attend school events and talk with people. You can collect signatures for your petition to get on the ballot. And those events are a really good place to connect with the people who are, you know, most likely to vote in those school elections. And now that school elections are combined with the general election, name recognition is important. There are going to be people who turn out to vote who did not follow, you know, the school election candidates. And so when they're reviewing a ballot, their decision to vote or not vote might just be based on the number of times they saw your name in the community. So, you know, getting yard signs and having some literature and a social media account and other ways to just generally get your word out to the community will be important.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I appreciate that insight. And one thing you said too that really resonated with me and Justin, Melissa, you guys have seen this sitting up at the dais. You know, it's important to be at those meetings. That means a lot, not only to people who are voting, but also to those you'd be working with that show that you're putting the time in, you know, by what I mean by people you're working with, the elected officials. So that's something that can mean a lot as well. So Justin, we'll go to you on just some of those realistic expectations for the campaign team and canvassing outreach, things along those lines.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is you got to be, you know, being realistic means that you genuinely need to be realistic about what you're up against. You know, with the county race, we're a very large county. And a lot of times I think a lot of folks will get wrapped up around the actual social media and they think, oh my God, I got to put all these efforts there. I got to try to get this messaging out there. But then when you start to actually look at the demographics of the people that vote in our county, you realize that majority of the age group that votes doesn't even have a social media account, let alone even using computers that often. So you really need to target your voters, you know, so each community is a little bit different too. So, you get out in some of these rural communities, like Oakland, for example, they're pretty well connected. I mean, you're going to see a lot more social media things that will work there, but you get out to maybe say Macedonia, your efforts may need to be targeted a little bit differently. So stopping out at the Back 40 restaurant bar out there, for example, is going to go a lot further than, sending out some targeted ads on Facebook out to that area. So, you just gotta think about it and attack it from multiple angles. And I'm fortunate that I've been in the military 21 years now, almost 21. And, I understand strategic targeting. And so I'm able to kind of just, conceptualize the big picture and figure out where I'm going to focus my efforts. Majority of the votes, for example, are in Council Bluffs. So I try to divvy out my timelines to be such the same. So about 2/3 of my time I spend in Council Bluffs. The rest I'm going out to the rural communities. And it's worked for me. It's a way. I've been successful twice so far. But, I'm sure times change too. But, another thing I'll say with social media too is you want to target the younger voters. These kids are using different platforms now. When I first ran, Facebook was great. The second time I ran, we started getting into these other platforms like Instagram and Twitter. And I'd say now getting on TikTok is probably important to have something like that going, so you can target those young folks if you want them to vote for you. And then, along with that too, social media's changed too. The way they allow you to do your messaging has been much different now. And Facebook's very strict about your messaging and how you campaign. So you got to understand those things right away. There's a lot of value to our local newspaper. There's a lot of folks that read it, making sure that, when you put your ads up there, that you're not just randomly picking a day to put them up there. I mean, you want to pick days that people are getting the paper. So maybe Sunday morning, for example, is important. You can talk to the nonpareil and they'll kind of give you some of that data. And, so sometimes, like, for example, the first time I ran, I think it was like Thursday papers were a hot item. So I put a lot of targeting ads in there too. Just what Chris said too about attending, those candidate forums. I'll share a little story with you. Last campaign cycle, my race had 9 candidates in it. And by the time we got to do this candidate forum, I had surgery the day prior. I had an inguinal hernia. And it was that important to me that I showed up the next day with an ice pack and still did that candidate forum. So, I mean, it goes a long way. And I urge anyone that's going to campaign to make yourself available for those things. Do whatever you possibly can to be there. It's very helpful. Pretty much everyone that shows up to that event or is going to watch it is a voter. They're interested in it. That's why they're there. So you want to make sure you're, participating in that. So I'll kind of echo what Chris said there a little bit, but, and then just thinking about, once you've been in office too, and it's kind of important, is that you have a record. And so you need to know what you're getting yourself into when you're going in door knocking, for example. I don't know if I'm going to door knock this next go around. I mean, with COVID, it's kind of a different world, and I don't know if people want me to go to their house. So, I mean, I need to kind of gauge that a little bit. Obviously, I don't have to campaign till next year, realistically, but you're going to make sure that you understand what you're getting yourself into and who it is you're going to be talking to. There's plenty of applications out there, softwares out there that'll kind of tell you who's voted in the past, if they're really hard right leaning, if they're just moderate conservatives, or maybe they swing a little bit in the center or center left or something. So you just want to make sure you know what you're getting yourself into. I've knocked on some doors and I've been screamed at before. I've knocked on doors and it's like I can't get away because they're just so welcoming. So, I mean, our communities are pretty awesome, but you just got to know what you're getting yourself into. And then, then again, I'll kind of back to the first question a little bit with this, is that you have a campaign team. Use your campaign team to help you reach out and get to these places. I can't, as one human being, there's 5 or 6 events going on in Council Bluffs during a week, and then there might be 1 or 2 out in the county. So what I would do is I'd say, go out to the county and go to the event out there, and then I'd have some people from my campaign team participate the ones locally, and if they can, they share some words on my behalf, or they hand out my, campaign swag. But the last thing I'll say here quickly is just, before you give it back to Melissa, is that you are a brand when you're campaigning. And so you want your brand to be reflected in the best light possible. And so you want to just play that marketing angle with everything you do. So don't waste your time on things that aren't going to work or have not worked in the past. Just really take a hard look at what does work. And even if it's out of your comfort zone, it's just something you're going to have to do to win a race. So I'll leave it there. I mean, I'm sure I'll have plenty of questions.
Thanks, Justin. And Melissa, that takes us to you on the question about realistic expectations for a local campaign to have the biggest impact.
Okay, thanks. And I'm going to forewarn you, I am babysitting my nephew, so we might hear some baby gabbles during this, but hopefully it's going to be mostly quiet. And I think Chris and Justin had some great points. Obviously, like Chris said, his campaign is sort of different, as is Justin's. You know, Justin's was broader. I would say city council, probably somewhere in the middle. And I think one point for sure is how much it does change. Like from the very first time I ran, Facebook was not really a thing at all. I mean, we hardly even used Facebook. We used a lot of direct mailers. We used a lot of newspaper campaigns. By the second and third time I ran, Facebook was a much bigger thing. And the newspaper had dropped off. And like Justin said, now I think if I was going to do it again, I would be on. So just really paying attention to what's popular at that point in time. But also Justin's spot on when he said, know who your, I think Chris said, you know who your voters are. You can spend a lot of time knocking on doors. I'll be honest, I never once knocked on doors. I did have some campaign team members that did do it for me. They liked doing it. That was great. It wasn't my comfort zone. It wasn't my thing. And so I don't think that's the be all end all, because that really can become so time consuming. Instead, I use that time to go to all the different events I could, even things I normally wouldn't have went to, you know, just attending as many community things as you can, or volunteer events, because that's where I really felt like you could maximize getting to know people and talking about things that were important to you. You know, I had a Down syndrome event that surprisingly I ended up, you know, meeting people that were like, oh, we had no idea that was, you know, something of interest to you. So you can really just get in touch with people more one-on-one that way sometimes, because it's a comfort. They're at an event they're comfortable at. You're not just approaching them at their house. I'm not saying door knocking is bad. It just was never my forte. But 100% agree with everybody else. Definitely attend the forums. I know we've had some people this last council race, I think it was, and even, you know, when I've run, there's been people that just haven't attended. They felt like there were so many, they didn't need to go. Well, you know, the organizer had a ton of time to get that on. People that show up are voters. I mean, those are definitely voters. So, you know, it's hard sometimes. You have to miss work, you have to miss family events, you have to miss vacations. But, you know, that also is going to be what's going to happen once you're elected, is you're going to have to make sacrifices. So I think 100% attending any forums you can and just getting out there. And, you know, Chris said, if it's a school board, it's school events. Like Justin said, in the county, you know, getting spread out in the county, city, picking things that just you normally wouldn't, and going and meeting those people and just sticking to what your core values are. You know, you can have 10-year goals for the community and stick with that. Like, you know, Justin said, you have an image, you know, keep that image, because the more you can just repeat what you're really wanting to run for, I think is helpful. So that would be my best advice, and just enjoy it. I mean, it's going to be stressful. It's going to be a lot, but if it's what you want to do, you're enjoying it, and people will see that too. And then I think that helps you be more approachable.
Thanks, Melissa. And Justin, we'll go to you next. And the question is actually perfect, because you actually kind of touched on it a little bit earlier when you mentioned coal. But, you know, the next piece is, you know, people, staff, experience, different materials, you know, what you need to make sure that you're covering, the bases that you need to make sure that you're covering in that regard to run a successful campaign. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think the first and most important thing is when you're creating any kind of literature or anything that you're going to be handing out with your name on it, number one, that everything's, you know, grammatically correct, that there aren't misspelling, you know, the misspelled words. There's making sure that you look good in the image, or at least you think you look good, or, you know, other people tell you look good enough or something, you know, but, you know, your name is attached to this. The other thing is your messaging. The message that you're trying to get out there, you want it to be heard, and you want people to remember that message. So getting into 15 different campaign, you know, ideas or discussion points is not the way to go. You want to hit those high ones. And so that kind of brings me back to knowing what's going on in the, you know, depending on what type of race you're running for, but knowing what's going on that level of government. So running around, for example, in the county and saying, oh, I'm going to fix the budget, I'm going to make sure that we got the best budget out there ever. When I'll tell you that we've, in the last probably 5 years, we've had the best budget our county's ever had in the history of our county. So going and saying that you're going to improve something that's not broken is probably not going to go a long way. Now, you want to go talk about, you know, making sure we have some seal coat roads, or fixing Greenview, or, you know, the potholes on some of these, or, you know, if you live on Longview Loop or Greenview, you know that the oil came up through the road, or Three Bridge Road, you know, so bring up some of those issues that matter to folks. And again, target your audience. So if you're going to go out to the rural communities, go talk about rural issues with them. Don't go talk about things that are going to be in urban part of the Council Bluffs. So, I mean, you also just need to make sure that you're genuine, you know, and be true. If you're not for something, don't say that you are if you're not really for it. You know, I've seen in the past some candidates that just say, you know, I'm all things county. And it's like, well, are you? You know, and you start to question that a little bit. And these folks that are voters are going to have those questions. They're going to say, okay, where do you live? If you don't own your property and you don't pay property taxes, you probably don't want to start talking about property taxes. You might want to pick a different social issue that is a little more relevant. So, I mean, just, you got to know yourself, be genuine, and again, target your messaging. And I don't want to steal everyone's thunder, so I'll let some other folks talk.
Thanks, Justin. And Melissa, we'll go to you on that same question. The people, the staff, the experience, materials, things along those lines that really allow you to run a successful campaign here in Council Bluffs and Platte County.
And I think we are really lucky here. We've got some great community volunteers. Naomi and Scott Corey were probably two of my biggest assets. I mean, they are unreal. They're so knowledgeable, so willing to help and put in time. Reach out. I had our PA guy at work was a good friend of mine, public affairs, and he was so good about helping me write up bios and proofreading. And so, again, we can't stress enough having that team of campaign people that you trust that can really, fact check things for you, give it an extra glance because you've looked at 10 times, you're going to miss, a grammar mistake, or, maybe you think, like Justin said, you think this image is great, but someone else might be like, oh, maybe you should have it in front of, this building. So just really having someone that's helping you with all that marketing material. And then again, use your resources. Like I know at the city level, all the city department heads, the mayor, everybody's very approachable. If you want to do a little research on a topic that is going to be a question at a forum, there's nothing wrong with reaching out to, public works director and saying, hey, Matt Cox, this is a question. I just don't know anything about it. Can you educate me? They're more than happy to, even now on council, every time we go to vote, we're going to ask questions when we need to. You can do that as you're running too. You don't have to know all the answers. You're not going to know all the answers. But if you're taking the time to research them and get back to people, they're going to appreciate that. Someone I think would much rather have you say, I don't know, but I'm going to look into it, than to make up an answer or try to BS your way through it, because people can tell. And like Justin said, be genuine. If there's something that that person really cares about, but it's just not your thing, you're better off telling them, like, I can see your point, but I don't agree. You don't have to be combative. Obviously, be very, very good about it. But you can always agree to disagree, or just say, let me look into it more. But don't ever say, yes, I'm going to do something, because it will come back to you at some point. That's going to be a vote, or that's going to be a topic, and then the real truth will come out. And that just does not look good, because you want people to trust you and to believe in you. And someone would rather have you be honest with them and be able to trust you than they would have it be the other way around. So that's my thoughts. I don't want to, like Justin said, let Chris have a chance too.
Well, thanks, Melissa. And same question to you, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would just reiterate the things that Justin and Melissa said about being knowledgeable and researched about what it means to be, from a school board standpoint, but at every level, there are things that we can and can't do. There are things we must and must not do. And just being knowledgeable of what those things are. What are the high priorities in the school district right now? What are the challenges they're facing? Attend or listen in to school board meetings so you know what the topics are. And maybe this is just because I've been in the position for several years now and have become a little hardened to certain things. But there's and I'm sure Justin and Melissa would agree with this. Public perception about what school boards can do and what school board members are responsible for doing is not always in alignment with reality. So we have a responsibility to sort of go out and educate the public on, what we're doing and why, and, what we can and can't do. One other thing I would say about school board elections is that my first campaign, I spent a very small amount of money, enough to stay under whatever that threshold is that I would have to report it back to the state. My second campaign, I didn't spend any money. But if I was running for the first time now in this next general election in a competitive race, I don't know if there are any school board candidates on the call or not, but if there are, or people listening in later, I think it will be important to have a plan for raising money and spending on a campaign if you really want to win. It's going to take that now that school elections are combined with the general election.
Thanks, Chris. And we'll start with Melissa on this one. And it's somewhat similar, so I understand if there's not a lot to add, but I do want to make sure I ask it just to make sure that you can cover some topics if possible. But are there any certain types of people, people, knowledge, experience, expertise that you think are quintessential to have a successful campaign, whether it's finance or whether it's political science or whatever that may be, just people that you have found that have been instrumental in your campaigns?
I think 100% you have to have someone that's familiar with the campaign process, because it is a little tricky to navigate the very first time. You have to file for a committee. You have to make sure you're keeping your finances right. You have to do the reports at different times. So 100% having someone that's done it before, just so that they know to be able to help walk you through it. I'm an accounting major, but that didn't mean that I knew anything about how to do election reports at first. So, you know, it's not even just knowing finances, but knowing someone that can do that right thing. And then beyond that, I think just truly someone that's organized and people that are going to be your best cheerleaders. You can figure it all out. It's not rocket science. Like, I think that it's more intimidating to run than it actually is to run. So, you know, you really just need supporters. You need people, because it's going to be hard. There's going to be times when you're going to feel like you've been picked apart and thrown out to the wolves and then some. I mean, people can be really harsh. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It can be rough. So you need that team of people that are just on your side 24/7 regardless to encourage you and support you. But yeah, you definitely need people that can help you get through that, you know, some of the paperwork though as well.
Thanks, Melissa. Chris, to you on the same question, certain types of people or skills or traits that are beneficial.
I don't have much to add to what Melissa said. She's right. You know, you can figure it out. It's not that challenging. Obviously, if you know a few high profile people in the community who are going to support you, or just people that are well-known, connected, you know a lot of people that maybe in different circles than you typically run in, you know, that are willing to support you, you know, that's a good thing to look for. Know your weaknesses, things that you're not great about. Melissa mentioned that she wasn't real thrilled about the idea of going and knocking on doors. I wasn't either. So finding people that are willing to do that for you is, you know, a good thing to do. You know, so that's really all that I would add, I think, to that conversation in terms of people that you'd be looking for to assist with your campaign.
Thanks, Chris. And Justin, same question to you on just types of people, traits that are valuable.
Yeah, you know, I'll tell you, I was super fortunate both times I ran. You know, the first time I ran, I was very close to Melissa Head and her family, and they helped me immensely, just kind of learn the ropes, broke a lot of those, you know, barriers that I had with introductions with folks in the community. And that leads me kind of to the next part of this, is that once you're, especially when you're already been in and you're running again, you've now made some connections and tap into those resources. You know, and Barry's on the phone call, Barry Cleveland. I've sat with Barry multiple times throughout my campaign cycles and just picked his brain on things and helped me understand issues that are out there. And you know, I'll tell you too, that I was also lucky that I had a coal button. I was very lucky that Naomi and Scott Corey were there. You know, now I run a partisan race, which is obviously a little different than what the city and school boards are doing. But you know, Naomi and Scott, for example, they're in the central committee, and so there are a lot of folks in the central committee that were more than willing to help me with my campaign, and so I'd leverage that when I could. And so I'd urge everyone to do that. But those traits that you're looking for, you know, you're looking for people that are you know, presentable. You want folks that are going to represent you well. You don't want to send someone out there that maybe not the best speaker to speak on your behalf. You know, find something else within your campaign for that individual to do. And you'll be surprised at how many folks will be willing to step forward and help you out with something. The other thing you got to do too is realize that there's some people that are your number one fan that just simply don't have the time to help you on your campaign. And so you got to try not to get discouraged by that, because when the time's right, those individuals will step forward. Those individuals will, you know, write a letter to the editor in the Nonpareil or something, or they will help you at some point in your campaign. So, I mean, just keep those people close to you and keep them on the back burner, and they'll you know, come forward. You know, I have a political science background. I just finished my master's in public administration and public policy. And so I have a pretty good idea of what's going on in government, especially local government. But that doesn't mean that's what you have to have in order to go run for office. Someone that has an engineering background is probably going to know a lot more things about the way roads are structured and how buildings are built than I ever would. So, I mean, I think the biggest thing, and I said it earlier in the last question, is just being genuine to who you are and your beliefs. And, you know, if the voters like that, they're going to vote you in. And, you know, I think the biggest thing is making sure your messaging is honest and, you know, true. And yeah, I'll leave it there. So.
Thanks, Justin. We'll start this next question, with Chris. And it's, what's the most valuable thing that you learned in running and holding office? You might have touched on it already, but just to give you a chance to talk a little more about that.
Well, to me, I think this probably has more to do with holding office, but good to know if you're planning to run for office for the first time. And might be a little obvious, but you really have to be committed to serve. You know, I ran for school board because I care a lot about education. I think that our public schools are the most important thing in terms of how the impact it will have on our Council Bluffs community that I care so much about. That's why I ran. And being in the role now, it takes a lot of your time and energy and emotional, and, you're going to be criticized. You're going to be criticized regardless of the decision that you make. This last year was really challenging with schools and, keeping kids and parents and staff safe. And, it was tough. You have to be prepared for that type of commitment, before you decide to get into this. And, I'm sure it's probably a little bit different at the city or the county, but I'm sure that, Justin and Melissa would agree that this is a serious thing. I take it very seriously. I care a lot about our community and the schools and our school board operating and functioning at the highest level possible. And, I put a lot of time and energy into it. I think a lot of people expect that to happen, but when you actually get into the role and realize that, you're going to face a lot of tough decisions and criticism from people, and you kind of have to figure out how to develop a thick skin about some of it, because it's not all. A lot of it is unwarranted criticism, and a lot of it's legitimate, but it's not always easy and it's not always fun. I enjoy it most of the time, but you really have to be committed to serve your community. And if you are, you can kind of get through a lot of those challenges. So that's what I would say is just be to really commit to serving your community, because, that's what we're elected to do. And it takes a lot of effort to do that. And you have to develop some thick skin sometimes too.
Thanks, Chris. That was some really good advice. And Justin, we're move on to you. Same question. Most valuable thing you learned in running for or holding office?
Yeah, so I'll 100% echo the thick skin comment. Running for office is an emotional roller coaster. There are days where you're going to have this high that you just knocked it out of the park on that candidate forum, and then you're going to drive home and drive past an opponent's sign, and it just completely ruined your night. So again, when I talked about having a really, your spouse on board, it's really good to have somebody in your life that you can lean on and make sure is there for you so that you can get through those hard times. I helped, Councilman Chad Hannon run his last race, and I'm not joking when I say that I had phone calls at 1 a.m. From him, as well as Andy Brown when he ran for sheriff, just losing their mind about what's going on. And, you got to kind of talk them off the ledge a little bit. So the biggest thing about having thick skin, though, is realizing that you're not going to make everybody happy. You are going to make decisions that are just going to absolutely make some people so mad at you, but you just got to deal with it. You're going to have to just get through it. The example I'll give you, the Board of Supervisors decided to put masks at the courthouse. And you would not believe the criticism that came from us making that decision. I stood firm on why we did it, and I still to this day believe it was the right move. But I'll tell you that there's some folks, I just simply lost some friends over the deal. And it's like, well, if that's the way it's going to be, it's the way it's going to be. So just know that. But the other thing I got to tell you, and it kind of back to that emotional roller coaster and the sign comment I made, signs do not vote. So your opponents can have signs all over the city, all over the county, wherever they want. But the reality is that a lot of times those folks just knocked on the door and asked that person to put the sign in their yard, and that person was just not willing to say no. And they may not vote for that person anyway. So, I turn my sign I do hashtag sign wars, and then I put the year attached to it, and I put signs all over the place, and I always try to take a picture of it, share it on social media. But at the end of the day, there's some of those folks probably didn't even vote for me either. So, you got to realize that signs aren't going to matter. It's your messaging that matters. It's getting out there and doing a good job of campaigning is what truly is going to matter in your race. So I'll leave it there because I know Melissa's probably got some good points to talk about too.
And Melissa, that leads us right to you for the most valuable thing you've learned.
Well, and I think, it's hard to pick just one thing, but I think both Chris and Justin have touched on it. You have to have tough skin. That was my biggest challenge. It's still my biggest challenge, honestly. I don't like criticism. Nobody wants someone not to like them. Nobody wants people to be upset with them, and they're going to be. There's just no getting around it. Like Justin said, there's been topics that I've had to vote, true to what I felt was right. And I have lost friends or acquaintances or, followers, whatever you want to call it, over it. So I think the most important thing then really along those lines is just staying true to who you are, like having those core values, having what you truly feel is best for the community and what you ran on, and just your core values, even as a person, staying true to who you are, regardless of what's happening, because there's going to be times you're definitely going to question it. You're going to second guess, am I doing the right thing? Because, you know, this number of people don't agree, or, you know, might not be the popular vote at the time. So just sticking with your true values and having that support system just to be there to back you up when you are getting things that are going to bring you down. Because you are, like, it's both during the election and once you're on, there's going to be times you need people to talk to. So just having, you know, having a good team that's going to say, Justin's right too. You know, whatever you're in a relationship, whether it's married, whether you're dating, it 100% a campaign can make or break it. I mean, it just can, because everybody gets drug into it on all different levels. And so I think that he touched on that a couple times, and I 100% agree with Justin. Like, I've been there through his, he's been there through some of mine. It can get rough. And so I think that's really, really important if you're thinking about running and you are married or even just dating, you know, making sure you really have that person on board with you and that you've had the hard conversations about what it's going to look like. And that's all I can think of.
Thanks, Melissa. And this is the last question I have, and we'll start with Justin. And it's any surprises or things that you did not foresee that you've learned from, or just also any other items that you wanted to make sure you shared with the group that we may not have covered?
Yeah, so I'll tell you the one thing that I want to share, and then I'll share a surprise with you. But when you're running for office, you have to realize, you know, I talked about earlier about being, you know, you're branding yourself, but you need to realize that you have a record, no matter whether it's your civil record or whether it's your voting record, or you know, you've done things in your life. And my best advice ever would be that you need to own it. It's not hard. You Google my name and type dash Council Bluffs or dash Pottawatomie County, and you're going to see a mistake that I've made in my life. But you got to own your mistakes. You got to own it. No matter what you've done, that book is open. When you run for public office, nothing is off the table. Something that you did 10 years ago could become part of this new campaign era. So having thick skin is very important there. I think the other thing is just owning it. If you make a mistake, admit you made a mistake and show what you did to overcome that mistake. I'll tell you what surprised the heck out of me the most when I ran. So the second time, we put a new bridge in Crescent, Iowa. And I'm not sure, some of you might remember this. It was all over the news, and the town was so upset with us. It was a bridge that we built to the north. We were trying to straighten the road and make it safer. But man, we just, as a county, did a terrible job of messaging, letting people know that happened. So in my mind, I thought this was going to be tough. I was chair at the time. I went up to Crescent. I apologized on behalf of the county for, you know, screwing that up and trying to make it better. But I took a lot of heat. It was not hard to look on social media and see all the terrible things that were said about me and the rest of the board members. But interestingly enough, when it came election time, I absolutely a sweeping victory in Crescent that I never thought I would have. The first time I ran, I was one of the lowest voters there. Second time I ran, there wasn't anybody even close to me. So, I mean, you just got to realize that sometimes people realize that you're a real human being and that you're not, you know, they do take you seriously, and sometimes things come full circle. So just stick to your guns, do what you know, trust yourself too. Know that if you put in the effort, that it is going to be rewarding in some capacity. You might not win that election, but if you know you gave it your best and you got close, you might get on the next time around. And that's true. I've seen people in the past that have done that. Chad Hannon is a perfectly good example of that. Joe DeSalvo was another good example of someone who got on that didn't get the first time around. So like I said, just do your best and know that as long as you can truly say you did the best and you committed the best, you gave your best effort, you're going to be in good shape. So I'll leave it there because I know there's some really good interest comments coming up.
Thanks, Justin. Melissa, same question to you. Any surprises that you can share? Anything else that you may want to share that we haven't had a chance to discuss?
You know, I really can't think of anything more than what Justin has said. I mean, he is right, though. There is nothing off limits. I mean, that's probably been the biggest surprise to me as I've run, you know, whether it be your family, whether it be things that you've done, you know, people really do sometimes get down in the weeds and, you know, get into personal things that you think, you know, what does that have to do with the campaigns? It truly doesn't. But I think just being prepared for that, being prepared for the fact that your private life is no longer private. You know, it's become public. Anything that's happening oftentimes will be in the public eye, you know, good or bad. And just being prepared for that and owning, you know, Justin said, there's going to be, whether it's votes you've made or, you know, even just actions, you know, anything. And everybody's, you know, moral compass and everybody's right or wrong, or, you know, whether it's, you know, it can be even religious, something religious, anything is out there. And just, you know, if someone has questions about it, being willing to be open about it, and also just being willing to accept that not everyone's going to see things the same way you do. and just finding a way to try to, find that compromise.
Thanks, Melissa. Chris, you get to bring us home on that topic of surprises or anything else we haven't touched on.
I think I've really touched on all of the things that might have surprised me during the campaign. I'd just add for the school board candidates that on this topic of being knowledgeable and informed, the Iowa Association of School Boards has a website with lots of really good information for candidates running for school board. I'd also, attend school board meetings, reach out to school board members. I'm happy to chat with anybody about my experience on the board, or contact the board secretary. That's a good resource for questions about filing the paperwork and that kind of thing. And one last bit of advice would just be to collect more signatures than you think you need.
Thanks, Chris. That's good advice, because Heidi from the Secretary of State's office hammered that home to make sure you get more than you need just to be safe. But I want to thank the three of you, Melissa, Chris, and Justin, for joining us. I want to thank everyone who sat through the 2.5 hours here today, and we're right on time ending. But the last thing I want to do just before we go is remind you that there are 3 more upcoming. July 9th, we have one on fundraising, voter outreach, and how to do it successfully in Council Bluffs. There's should be a pretty lively panel on that one. It's Mike Brownstall, Brent Segrist, Chad Hannon, and Liz Mathis, who decided to add her name to a U.S. congressional seat right after we got her registered for this. So that'll be a good one. And then July 30th, we have communication strategy. And then August 6th, we have social media, online presence using texting and all these other electronic resources that are out there. And we will continue to record those and continue to make those readily available on our social media, on our newsletters, and on our website, because we think it's really important to provide those as a leadership tool in our public policy program as well, and tying that all together. So with that, I thank you all very much for attending. I hope you all have a very nice weekend, and just make sure you guys take care of yourselves. And thanks again for everyone for participating.
Thanks, Drew, for hosting too. This was great. I think hopefully it's really helpful for everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everybody.
I put, just so everyone knows, I think all of us are pretty, it's easy to find our contact information, but certainly if you have questions, reach out to us. I'm more than willing to share more advice offline and talk to you about what I went through when I ran my races and what I intend to do next time around. So anyway,
that's a good point. The last thing I'll say too, Justin, is if you want to connect with Heidi, obviously her information's public. Tyler, private industry, he's got a separate, but if you want to get a hold of him, let me know. I'm happy to connect you. Yep. Thanks, everybody.
Good information. Thank you.
We'll see you.
Everybody.